You're listening to the Waking the Wild show, a podcast dedicated to the ones who see and feel things differently, the ones who say hell no to the status quo, the ones who deeply long to fully claim their one wild and precious life. You are the souls the world's been waiting for. You came here for a mythical life, to be the sovereign leaders, the world changers, the magical ones. You came here to liberate your wild self from cultural taming, discover your kin, and fulfill your soul path. And we are here to guide you on your journey of reclaiming your wildness and actualizing your deepest gifts, so that you can live fully and die complete. And now, your host, Leanne Brooke Tyler.
Hello, my beautiful people. A huge warm welcome back. This show is for the old souls who often serve as the coaches, healers, teachers, community leaders and guides, which, as you're listening to this, I suspect includes you. You are the mythical ones who are here to truly know yourself, to liberate yourself from wounding and conditioning, to embody ancient ways alchemized for modern days, serving your unique soul's medicine to your community. Every old soul comes into this world with their own unique purpose and deep soul gifts, their medicine. The work for each of us is to uncover that medicine and become it in deep service. And yet, it's never been more challenging to become our medicine than now. And there's never been more need for our medicine than now. This is the greatest challenge of our lives for the old souls in this new world, which if you're one of us, you'll know all too well. Perhaps you're already working as a coach, healer, practitioner, therapist, mentor or guide, but you sense you're still selling your soul to some extent in order to conform to industry norms and cultural expectations. And you're not yet fully clear on what your unique soul medicine is or how to honour and actualize it in your work. It is for this reason we created medicine. The crucible that could be described as a jewel in our crown. It's for 11 people called to begin their deepest, most intimate and powerful journey. To discover your soul's purpose, uncover your unique gifts, become your medicine. And we are delighted to let you know that the doors are now open for enrolment for what will be the longest, deepest medicine yet. We begin in January 2024 and we complete in December. You can find out more and book a medicine illumination call with me or Jonathan personally, where we will explore whether it is indeed a soul aligned for you to join us by going along to wakingthewild.com/medicine now. And now onto this week's show. It's with Rob Wildwood. Rob is an author, photographer, a tour guide and a folklore researcher from the north of England. He was born in a seaside town in Yorkshire and spent his childhood exploring the local countryside and the myths and folklore of the North York moors. He was introduced to Norse shamanism in his early 20s and had a keen interest in history, particularly the history of Britain's pagan past. He was fascinated by the animist beliefs of primitive cultures, which see everything in nature as being imbued with spirit. This led Rob to travel the world experiencing indigenous cultures, including spending time with the Kalahari Bushmen and the nomadic Penan of Borneo and the forest Naikas of India. These travels revived his interest in shamanism, and he eventually returned to England to study core shamanism in Glastonbury. While there, he also became involved in the fairy scene, where people dressed as magical beings and even practiced a form of pagan fairy spirituality. This marked the beginning of another long adventure where he sought out and photographed magical places all over Britain, tuning into the energies of these places and receiving channeled messages using shamanic journeying techniques. This led directly to the publication of his first book, Magical Places of Britain, which is a richly illustrated photographic guide to the folklore of these sites. His spiritual ventures and visionary experiences while visiting these sites have been collated into his book, The Land of the Fae. Rob now has settled down in Glastonbury, Somerset, where he still lives and is self-employed as an author, photographer and tour guide. In this conversation, we explored the magical history of Britain, how we can reconnect to this land and its spirits, and reclaim the magical, mythical worldview that's our human birthright. Let's dive in. Hello, Rob. A huge warm welcome to the show.
Hello.
Really good to have you here. And I know we're going to talk about the kind of like the weird stuff, which I'm already really excited about. So I want to begin by just hearing a bit about your journey to doing the wild and magical work that you do now. How did all this begin?
Well, I guess my interest in folklore first started because I was brought up on the east coast of Yorkshire, and we used to do trips to the North York moors. And I used to have an old map showing where all the kind of the hobs and the giants, all the different legends of the North York moors. So to me, that was always a very magical kind of place, you know. And when I started visiting sacred sites, then much later in life, I went back to the North York moors, and I bought all these books on folklore, and I actually visited all the sites and photographed all the sites, you know, and that really got into the spirit of place of the North York moors.
I love that. As I was saying to you before we began recording, I often notice how there's clues in our childhood to like what then will become that soul work that we do later on. And like you, I had this real fascination with myths and legends as a child, which then I kind of like put to one side. And then in later life, kind of like they called me back. So what was that kind of, do you feel that there was like a moment where you were really called back, or did that continue? Was there a kind of gap, or were you always kind of like passionate and interested in the British land and its myths?
Yeah, well, I've never really been into the great big myths like the Greek gods and all that kind of thing. I've been more into always more into the folk magic and things. And it's almost like I've lived a past life, you know. And I wanted to relive it. I wanted to go back to those times when the world was full of magic and mystery, you know. And I can just imagine being in a lonely cottage on the North York moors, you know, and at night time, you know, with the wind howling and all the spirits of the land outside. So I've always wanted to kind of recapture that feeling. And so, when I was older, I got into shamanism. It was like Norse shamanism to begin with. And I took that up again later in life when I started visiting the Bushmen of the Kalahari and other people like that. And I got back into shamanism and the real magic of the land, you know. I mean, the first place I really felt it was in South Africa when I was visiting the Drakensberg Mountains and the other sites associated with the Bushmen. And I did a lot of travels around the world, and I suddenly had this feeling that I need to go back to Britain, you know, and I need to find this magic in my own land. And that was really the inspiration for my books and where it all started.
Oh, I love that so much. You know how many people I speak to who, particularly actually, I would say the fellow Brits, where they've had all sorts of kind of like twists and turning journeys over the years, but there's a point where the land itself starts to call them. That was certainly the case for me. I had no intention of diving down the shamanic path whatsoever, and yet it was the land, the British land and the magic of the land that called me there. And like you, it felt really true and important that if we are going to, whether we call it, you know, shamanism or something else, but if we're going to work in those ways, that it is grounded on the land that we're in. And for me, at least, that's this land, this British land. Yeah. And really, and I think, you know, it can seem as though because we don't have the intact lineages of some other place in the world, it can seem as though we are bereft of that kind of magic with the connection with the spirits of the land. And yet, I think any of us that start to open those doorways find out that it couldn't be further from the truth. So I'd love to know what you discovered as you started to be called back to this land.
Well, you're right that we don't have the intact lineages in this country, but we do have the folklore, you see, and that's, to me, that's kind of like a pathway into the past. I mean, of course, the folklore has changed over the centuries, and you know, originally fairies would have been like nature spirits or beings from the other world. You know, this is back in the times when we were all like had an animist mindset and believed that the whole world was full of spirits. But over time, it's changed until you get to the Victorian period where fairies become these twee little women with wings and stuff. You know, and so that's evolved massively over time.
So how were you beginning to see that connection between the folklore and the land itself? I know that so much of your passion is about the sacred sites like the Standing Stones. How did those two different strands start to weave together for you?
Yeah, it's hard to say, really. I've always been into the ancient sites and the stone circles, but that was really before I got into the folklore and spirituality. I mean, like you were saying earlier about being called back to Britain, I mean, there was a time when I said I would never live in Britain again. I was living in Scandinavia, in Sweden at the time.
Oh, wow. Oh, so when you were doing the Norse shamanism, that was when you were in Scandinavia rather than in Britain?
No, that was later, actually. I did the Norse shamanism in Britain, but later, because I was very involved with Viking reenactment and Viking culture, and so I ended up living in Sweden, and but it actually happened that I was actually driving from the UK to a festival. I think it was in the north of Denmark or somewhere. And it was a big, long drive, and I suddenly asked myself, like, why am I doing this? You know, why am I doing this? This is not my path. Why am I doing this? And I was suddenly realized I had to go to Glastonbury instead, and so I came back to Glastonbury. And yeah, my whole life changed from there. I started studying shamanism and doing courses, and I ended up going to these fairy festivals, and that started my whole spiritual journey, really.
Oh, wow. I love that. And what have you personally, I want to get into in a moment, kind of what you see more generally. But for the moment, I'd love to explore a bit more about kind of what unfolded for you? What did you discover about yourself as you followed that path? I love the way that kind of like, it's like, what am I doing here? Like I can't remember how you named it. So like, I'm just living the wrong life. I'm on the wrong path. So as you stepped onto the right path, what did you discover?
Well, I mean, I discovered my soul's purpose, really. I mean, that's what we're all looking for, isn't it? You know,
it certainly is.
I discovered that what I was meant to be doing was visiting all these sacred sites, many of which have been forgotten about, and activating them and doing rituals on them and honoring them. And then eventually I just got the message that somehow I had to get this information out there. I wasn't just to keep it to myself. And I started by publishing a blog, and eventually that became a book, my first book, which was called Magical Places of Britain. And that was just my way of inspiring people to reconnect with the land, because until I started visiting all these places, I had no idea they existed. You know, I'd never been to a holy well in my life. I didn't know that such things still existed in the UK. And now I find that the whole country is littered with them. You know, once you know where they are, I'll know where to look.
Wow. And so you didn't at all set out thinking, oh, this will be my work. It was initially a very kind of personal call to explore and discover these places.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, to begin with, it was just kind of having fun. I mean, my journey really started when I went to a fairy festival, and I met someone there who took me to Merlin's Cave in Tintagel, and it's like I did a shamanic journey there, and like an initiation. And
that's got a bit of stuff. So many great stories. A friend took me to Merlin's Cave.
So many. It's amazing. Yeah, there's several people have told me their journey started in Merlin's Cave. I don't know how it happened. But yeah, really, I felt like I got initiated into Merlin's magic circle there on this shamanic journey that I had, and from there it was like I was guided from one place to another. And at this point, I had no intention writing a book or anything like that. It was just a spiritual journey I was being taken on.
Yeah, that's what I see over and over. There's a point where it's not just that we're on our own path, kind of like on our soul path, discovering our soul purpose. It feels to me there's a point where we like just open to a different view on life, like a magical worldview, an animist worldview, where everything then takes on a completely different feel, a different meaning. And it feels like that's what happened to you in Merlin's Cave. Would you agree with that?
Totally, yeah. I mean, that was the start of it's a total shift in worldview. You're shifting from the modern kind of mundane, mechanistic worldview to some kind of a magical, mythical worldview. And it's kind of a switch that happens in your brain, yeah. And that experience in Merlin's Cave was really the starting point. And I actually wrote a whole book about how my spiritual journey began, beginning with Merlin's Cave, and that book was called The Land of the Fae. And it's basically it's really a collection of all the blog posts that I started writing shortly after that.
Yeah, this is bringing tears to my eyes, because I feel that it's that, what we're talking about here, this magical, mythical, animist worldview feels increasingly to me like it's our birthright. It's a human birthright. It's actually completely natural for us. And yet most people, may live a whole lifetime and not even know it exists, not even know that it's there for them.
Well, yeah, and that's sad, yeah. I mean, it's true that, for 90% of, the existence of humans on Earth, we've followed an animist path, believing that there was spirits and everything, and that we were part of that greater spirit world, like not separate from it, connected to it. And just over time, we've just become more and more and more disconnected. We've been programmed to think a certain way, which excludes even the possibility of a spirit world. We're not even allowed to. If you're a scientist, if you're an academic, you're not even allowed to contemplate such an idea, because you'd be ostracized.
Yes, I so appreciate. In fact, I've had a number of conversations on the show with people who are very much in that very kind of scientific, supposedly materialist world, but have dared. They've been so called by spirit to, include that in their work. But that does come at a real risk. It very much does. But it was once about a year ago, a podcast guest said to me something like, he sees that the animist worldview isn't only the worldview that humans had for most of our history. It's actually innate in the way that it's kind of like it's natural even for us modern humans. And then we're conditioned out with it. Yes, it's kind of like there already. For you and for me, even if we've been raised in this modern culture where that isn't kind of the agreed upon worldview, it still is our innate worldview that we get conditioned out of, but we can come back to. And when he said that, I was like, oh my goodness, that feels so true. It is the innate worldview, because it is true.
Yeah, I mean, there's something that anthropologists call human universals, which is characteristics that are shared by absolutely every single human culture in the world. And one of those human universals, and there's lots of them, is magic. The belief in magic and spirits. All human cultures have had that. And you have to ask yourself why. That they've had that since before the beginning of history. If there's no truth to it, why do all human cultures have that?
Yes, absolutely. So coming back again, as I was saying to you before we began recording, most of the listeners to this show are somewhere on the path we're describing already. They are one way or another working with spirit, with magic, in service of their communities. But I still feel that because, again, we're operating in a context where, most of this is seen as like nonsense, rubbish, or just isn't even known of. I think conversations like these are so important because they kind of allow us to go deeper and deeper into that way of being in relationship to all things, ourselves and all things. What I'd love to know is, from your understanding of visiting these sites and, you know, discovering some of them that have been hidden, how do you see that they can be places that allow us to step more into that way of being? What can they offer those of us that are already some way or other kind of like aware of this magical, mythical worldview? What do you see that these sites have to offer?
Well, like I was saying, to me, the folklore is like a pathway back into the past, back into spirit, back into our ancient beliefs. So what I tend to do is I'll read the folklore, I'll go to a site, then I'll just tune in, you know, focus on my breath and just go on a shamanic journey and just see what comes up. And quite often you just get feelings, impressions just come from the place, or even whole stories and conversations can come up. So to me, these places have a certain magic that you just can't find anywhere else. I mean, you can go to your local woodland, but because we've lost all the stories now to do with the land, it's much harder to tune in, really. I mean, whereas in the past, like the Aboriginal cultures, every rock, every riverbed, you know, every mountain's got a story. The whole land is storied, you know, and this is what I'm partially interested in, is restoring the landscape, you know, bringing the stories back to life again so that we can regain our connection with the land.
Yeah, I love that. So the stories act a bit like a map of the land and the particular kind of inhabitants of that land. Yes,
well, they serve multiple purposes. Yeah, because it's a way of. I mean, they were used for navigation too. You know, because everywhere's got a story. It helps you remember them as you're walking around the land. You can say, "Oh, that's the place where that happened, and that's the place where that happened." And stories are the way that people can remember huge amounts of information. So that's just one of the aspects of it. Though there's many different aspects to you know, these story connections with the land.
What have you seen? Because I know that you take people on tours to these different sites, and I'm guessing part of that includes you telling the stories of the place. What have you seen happen as you've done that? Like, have you got any stories of, you know, people's experiences when they've come to those sites with you and had that kind of the story and those beings brought to life in that way?
Well, I actually don't do many tours. I mean, I take friends to places occasionally, but I mean, for me, it's a very personal thing. You know, I mean, I feel like I can't fully tune in when there's other people around. You know, for me, I need to go very, very deep. I mean, there's certain people who are bombarded by messages from spirit and impressions and feelings all the time, and they can't even switch it off. Whereas with me, I have to really, really tune in deeply to be able to connect with places. So I actually find people a bit of a distraction. So yeah.
No, that does make sense. And I think, we're all wired differently in terms of kind of how sensitive and open we are to, you know, different spirits in different ways. And I think that's all perfect part of the design too. I think, you know, you needed to be the way you are so that you ended up being called in the way that you were, but that makes complete sense. So for people listening, you know, most of us will have heard of the kind of more famous sites, like, say, for example, Stonehenge is an obvious one. What would you do? What would you say to those of us that are like, okay, this is awakening something in me, this sense of like, perhaps there's places local to me, stories that are kind of on my land. How would you suggest that we take that kind of next step into that relationship?
Well, to be honest, I'd recommend my book, Magical Britain. And that's not self-promoting. It's just that it was written with that exactly in mind.
Purpose. Yes.
It was written with that purpose. Like, no matter where you live in the country, there's somewhere where you can go. I mean, my first book, which was called Magical Places of Britain, it had only 80 sites in it, and it was more like a documenting my journey. Whereas the latest book, it's covering the entire country. You know, England, Scotland, Wales, and every little corner of the country's got places that you can go and visit.
Yeah, I'm already feeling kind of like my next thing after this was we'd go get your book, if I'm honest.
I'm surprised you've not seen it already.
Well, as I say, I discovered you via the wonderful Watkins Books magazine. And my first step often, if someone tickles my fancy, is to have a conversation, because I like to be able to have a conversation like this that's kind of from my curiosity rather than having already known the answers, if that makes sense. But so that will be my next step. To broaden this out, so as I said to you, I'm really happy to have the conversation very specifically about this land, which, you know, both of us know and love, but our listeners are international. And is there anything you would say to people who perhaps, you know, what I think what we're talking about absolutely does apply to other places, albeit different stories, different sites. Is there anything you would say to people who aren't on this land that would be helpful for them to start to explore this way of living and relating to the land?
Well, I mean, my first port of call would always be folklore. There's always books about folklore relating to most countries. But if you're living somewhere like the United States, I would say get into the Native American culture. I mean, that's what I do when I go to the United States. I research all the sites that are sacred to the local tribes, and obviously some of them are off limits and you can't go to, but the ones that you can, that you can go to, I mean, you can tune into the spirit of that place and the spirit of that land. That's what I do when I'm traveling around the world. Yeah.
I love also the way that you've brought, you know, whether we call it a shamanic journey or kind of like really just being still and going inward, or a different way of entering that place of trance, really, and openness. I love the way you're weaving that in, because I think that's also part of what's been lost. You know, we've lost the understanding that these, what we're kind of, you know, might call a trance state, is also so natural to humans.
It is.
This isn't. Yeah, it's not kind of like something that's only for a select few. It's for all of us. And again, is one of the doorways in which that we can open to these experiences. So I love the way that you're giving that as the example, because again, we don't need to be trained in shamanism to enter a state where we are receptive in that way. But I think it's important to know that it is an important part of it.
Yeah. It's about switching off the thinking mind, you know, because our thinking mind has been so programmed over the centuries and in our lifetimes, you know, through school and society and whatever, and that needs to be switched off, and going out in nature and just walking and taking in the sights and the sounds and the smells is one way of doing that, you know. And personally, like I said, I focus on my breath, so I do deep breathing and focus on the breath, and that it calms down the mind and leaves you more open and sensitive to receive impressions from the environment around you, because usually we're just in our own heads thinking, going blah 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 blah, and we're not really taking anything in that we're seeing.
Yes, it can be a real, I mean, the reason this show is called the Wake in the Wild show is because we see that relationship with the land, with the wild, is, I think, probably we could say a necessity to be able to live in the ways that we're describing. But that in itself can take time, you know, to really reclaim that way of being. I remember going back years ago how if I was out in nature, you know, I'd be in varying states of kind of like disconnection with where I was, you know, to the point where for some people it's perfectly normal to be listening to music or a podcast and thinking, well, I'm out in nature, I'm getting the benefits. And I know that I may not have done that, but I would be kind of so in my mind, I may as well be anywhere, you know, I wasn't really present. And I think there's this, again, recognition that there is more there. Like it isn't just about, you know, being in a nice environment and seeing the trees. There are real beings that are there and ready to communicate with us. And knowing that, we wouldn't then just kind of like be filling our ears with music.
Well, exactly. I mean, part of the problem, of course, is that it's too safe in this country. You can literally go out walking and you can be in your own little world. But I've been walking in, you know, like in the jungle in Australia. You don't really want to be like listening to a podcast because, you know, you could be stepping on a snake, or, you know, there could be something around the next corner. You just never know. I mean, I've been in Africa in the savannah, you know, and you just out for a walk, you don't know, there could be a lion around the next tree. And when you're in that environment, it suddenly dawns on you, like, this is how our ancient ancestors felt. It was like total awareness all the time. You have to be completely aware of every tiny little sound, every movement of the air, every smell, and our ancestors would have been like this all the time. They would be constantly tuned into the environment around them, but we've just completely closed ourselves off. And it just blows my mind when I see people walking through the forest, like listening to music on their headphones. It's just like incomprehensible to me.
Yeah. I actually I was speaking to a family member recently, and she was telling me she watches television on her phone when she walks, and I thought there's part of my soul that died here.
Exactly, yeah.
But again, no wrong making, no shaming. Like, again, we're in a culture that just doesn't understand why we might want to actually just be present to the place we're at. So we're almost out of time. The time is shot by. I would love to hear your sense in terms of, again, when we're talking about the beings that fill these stories, the folklore of giants and fairies, and how over the years they've become almost like Disney-fied. But I'd love to hear your sense as to what you've discovered firsthand, as you've kind of used those stories as a map back. What have you discovered about those beings and what they, what they might want, what they can offer us, the kind of relationships we can have? What have you discovered personally as you've journeyed down this path?
I think the main thing I've discovered is they want to be honored and respected again. Because, in the past, they'd go to places in nature, they'd have a little shrine, they'd leave offerings for the spirits, and like they're still doing in countries like Bali, where there's a shrine on every corner, on every tree, and they're honoring the spirits constantly. And this is what I'm feeling in this country. That I've had experiences, where I've been to a cave that might be inhabited by the spirit of a hob or a household spirit, and it's like they're dormant. It's like they're unwanted, unloved, hidden away, and they just want to be honored and respected again. And it's been such a long time, because even when Christianity came to the land, it kind of like turned these nature spirits into evil spirits, and so people have been shunning them for a long time now.
Yeah, you've just put something into my awareness that has really floored me. I'm not sure I'll do a very good job of explaining this because it's so fresh, but it feels important to honor it. The land I live on has got an old well, but the way the different houses have been kind of like the land's been divided up, the well that my house actually takes its name from, it hasn't ended up being on my land. And so I don't have access to the well itself, but it is still on the land. And I'm guessing there's clearly kind of water that runs under the land that, may well probably be on the land that I live on, that runs to it. And it's just dawned on me how over the past few months, that's been calling to me to honor in just the way you're saying. And I knew there was something speaking to me, and I wasn't clear what it was. I knew it's to do with water. And it's just as you've said that, I've realized like it's not been honored. The spirit of that well is here, and I wasn't aware, and it's just hit me like a ton of bricks as you were talking then. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, it's almost like the energy of these places becomes stagnant. They become overgrown. They turn into like a swamp. And they just need to be cleaned out and honored and respected again. And the water. What I do, which I explain in my Land of the Fae book, I energize quartz crystals and I put them into the very source of the spring to re-energize the water and kind of bring it back to life. So almost like it's almost like homeopathy. Each spring had different kind of healing properties, and these properties just need to be reawakened and re-energized.
Goodness, this has been an unexpected bonus of this conversation. really for so much emotion and gratitude to that well that I can feel has been working its magic without me even realizing. Wow. So we are now up on time, and this has been a gorgeous conversation. For listeners that like to find out more, I know you've already mentioned some of your books, but I think, given we're now at the end of the conversation, feel free to speak again about any of the books that you think would be a really good next step for listeners after hearing this, but also your website too, because I know that, as you say, you have a blog there and lots of other goodies.
Yeah, well, my website is called themagicalplaces.com. And the book that I mentioned is The Land of the Fae. I mean, all my books are available on Amazon and wherever. Yeah. And the book that I published after that, which I didn't mention yet, is called Primal Awareness. And that basically talks about what we were talking about how we all used to be connected to animism in the past. And it goes through about 19 different stages of how we became more and more and more separated over history. And it also, with each chapter, it gives exercises on how we can reconnect, exercises we can do to reconnect to spirit and to nature. And then my final book is Magical Britain, which I published last year, which is the book I mentioned that's got over 650 enchanted and mystical sites all around the British Isles. And that's my latest offering.
Wonderful. And that's the book I'm going to go get right now.
Yeah. See what's around your way. Yeah, you never know.
Yes. Yeah, I'm very excited like that. And creating the conscious relationship with the well of this land, my next two steps after this conversation. So thank you so much, Rob. This has been an absolute delight. Really appreciate you and the work you're doing.
Okay, thank you.
What a gorgeous show. Here are my takeaways. The folklore and the tales of the land can act like maps showing us the magical places and beings that inhabit those places that are waiting for us to rediscover them. To commune with the spirits of the land, we need to create the right conditions to open to them, whether that's a shamanic journey, following the breath, or on entering trance in some other way. Rob has seen that the beings of the land want to be recognised and honoured again. We can give that to them with our attention and offerings. If you'd like to get the notes for everything we spoke about this week, hop on over to the show notes, which can be found at wakingthewild.com/podcast/428. And if you're ready to join us for your deepest, most intimate and powerful journey, that of discovering your soul purpose, uncovering your unique gifts and becoming your medicine, book your medicine illumination call with me or Jonathan by going to wakingthewild.com/medicine now. If you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, and as you've probably seen, we are releasing gold after gold on the show lately. So if you don't want to miss out, do go to Apple Podcaster or your app of choice and hit that subscribe or follow button. That way you'll get each episode delivered auto-magically straight to your device as soon as it comes out. And if you'd be willing to give us a review or mention us to your friends, either way, it allows new people to discover the show and benefit from it too. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. I'm sending you all my love, and I'll catch you again next Wild Wednesday.